Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Prorevenge story. Note: in the province of Ontario, the only legal and recognized land surveyor is an Ontario Land Surveyor, OLS. Your brother-in-law, who knows how to work a transit, just isn't qualified. I moved from the Toronto area back up north in 2017. In 2018, we bought a home on a 4-acre forested lot from the original owner, Mrs. Carter. Through conversations with Mrs. Carter, I remembered her muttering something about how the neighbor to the north had their driveway awful close to the property line. "You might want to keep an eye on that Richardson fellow," she said, pointing vaguely northward. "His driveway seems to be creeping closer every year." I thought no more about it until later that fall. Our neighbor's house was built slab on grade, and the builder must have messed up or not properly installed any drainage for the gravel pad. Every time it rained, they had water into their ground floor. An inconvenience to say the least, but not my problem. That is, until Richardson rented an excavator and had a deep ditch dug all along our side of his driveway, dumping all of rocks and spoil from the excavation onto our property. We also lost a number of trees, this all mature black maple sugarbush trees. I was getting concerned. We had problems with a jerk neighbor in Toronto and ended up having to get a survey and put up a fence. I wasn't going to lose any sleep worrying about it this time. Call for a surveyor and get this over with. "Honey," I told my wife, "I think we need to get this property line issue sorted out before it gets worse." "Do whatever you need to do," she replied. "I don't want another Toronto situation." It turns out the OLS firm I called were the ones who surveyed the development when it was built 10 years earlier. They had no trouble mapping out how and where Richardson's driveway for over 100 feet now arced up to 12 feet onto our property, never mind the rocks and dirt in the bush beyond that. "This is pretty clear-cut," the surveyor said, pointing to the markers. "There's no question about the encroachment here." I sent a registered letter with a copy of the survey and a polite letter to Richardson. With registered, you have to sign to pick it up. They received it, but did not respond. I waited a month, and then sent another registered letter. That one wasn't picked up and was returned to me. Yeah, that should work. If I don't receive the letter, everything will just go away. In way of explanation, Richardson was a successful local businessman, and in smaller communities, some of them tend to think that they're a bit special and can make their own rules. I learned from the jerk neighbor in Toronto that there's not much point trying to discuss things personally. We have a system. Let's use it. The next letter that's sent to them is from our real estate law firm. They know the right language to use and how to get someone's attention. Surprise! That one not only gets picked up, but we receive a letter from their lawyer, Miss Patel. They freely admit that they're at fault and will make everything right. "Mr. Richardson acknowledges the encroachment and intends to remedy the situation," the letter stated formally. Except they don't. They don't do anything for the next 3 years. Absolutely nothing. I starting receiving expert advice from some of my friends. "You should fix it at your own cost and then sue them for that amount," said my buddy Dave. Well, what if they claim they could have fixed it a lot cheaper, or I did a bunch of things that weren't needed?" "You should charge them for all the trees they cut down and make them replace them," insisted my neighbor from down the road. "Yeah, but we do live in the forest and trees aren't really hard to find. In fact, we cut down trees that get too big too close to the house. It's not like we're in the big city." I decide to do nothing. After the angst and sleepless nights with the jerks in Toronto, I decide to just wait it out. After all, they've admitted fault through their lawyer. It's not like they can wiggle out of that one or change their minds. "Are you sure you want to just let this go?" my wife asked one evening. "I'm not letting it go," I explained. "I'm playing the long game. I learned that Mrs. Richardson hates living in the forest and would much rather have a schmancy house in town. And with the water problem that has never been resolved, it just isn't as much fun as they had thought it would be. I hear she's been looking at properties closer to downtown," a mutual acquaintance told me over coffee. Can't say I'm surprised. 4 years later, what I was waiting for. A realtors for sale sign in front of their house. I stop and take a picture of the sign so that I have the phone number of the listing agent, Taylor Holmes. I call them as soon as I get to work. "Hi, this is Mark. I see you're listing a property at XX. You may not be aware of this, but your client is trespassing on my property." "I'm sorry, what?" the agent replied, clearly caught off guard. "You heard me right. There's a documented encroachment that's been acknowledged in writing. It needs to be remedied before any sale can proceed." Of course, Richardson can't pretend this isn't true, and now we have to clean up the mess to our satisfaction before the property can be sold. Oh my. The 5-yard dump trucks ran for close to 3 weeks. They hauled load after load after load of topsoil. It had to be dumped, spread out, and compacted. "You're really making them do this properly, aren't you?" remarked my wife as we watched the workers from our kit carter window. "They've had years to fix it. Now it gets fixed right," I replied. The gravel driveway had to be dug up and pulled back to the property line, and all that filled in as well. At the end, it was all seeded with the understanding that it will eventually go back to being forest. "Is it okay now?" Richardson called me, his voice tight with frustration. "Not quite yet. It looks like there's still a lot of work to do," I answered calmly. All the weeping tile, rocks, and piles of dirt were removed as well, not a job easily done and very time-consuming. "I had no idea it would cost this much," I overheard Richardson telling his contractor one day. "Should have fixed it when you first found out." The contractor shrugged. "Don't get mad. Wait, then get even." The next one is an entitled people story. Looking back, the cabin was nothing special to most people. Just a small, sturdy structure my grandfather built with his own hands in the Colorado mountains. But to me, it was everything. A sanctuary away from the noise of the city, filled with childhood memories of fishing trips and winter fires. I inherited the cabin 5 years ago when my grandfather passed. It sits on about 3 acres of land that's been in our family for generations, way before the fancy development sprung up half a mile down the road. I only get out there once every couple months to maintain it and enjoy some peace and quiet, so you can imagine my shock when I drove up one Friday afternoon to find a bright orange notice taped to the door. "Notice of violation, unauthorized structure, demolition required within 47 hours or legal action will be taken." The notice had an official-looking stamp from something called the Pine Valley Homeowners Association and was signed by someone named Barbara Harding, HOA president. I'd never heard of any Pine Valley HOA. My property wasn't part of any development. It predated everything around it by decades. I tried calling the number on the notice right away, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message explaining there must be some mistake, that my cabin had been here for over 60 years and wasn't part of any HOA. Then I set about removing the offensive notice and going inside to unpack. I was halfway through making dinner when someone pounded on my door. I opened it to find a woman in her 50s with perfectly highlighted hair and a scowl that could curdle milk. "I'm Barbara Harding, president of the Pine Valley HOA," she announced without introducing herself. "You need to stop whatever you're doing here immediately. This structure violates our community standards and must be demolished." "Excuse me?" I said, genuinely confused. "This cabin has been here for over 60 years. My grandfather built it. It's not part of your HOA," she huffed dramatically. "All properties in this area fall under our jurisdiction now. The county rezoned last year. Your shack doesn't meet our architectural guidelines. It's bringing down property values." "That's not how HOAs work," I said, trying to stay calm. "You can't just claim someone's private property as suddenly part of your association. I never signed anything." "The guidelines are very clear," she said, ignoring me completely. "No rustic structures. All homes must be a minimum of 2,500 square feet with approved modern exteriors. You have until Sunday at noon to remove this eyesore, or we'll have it removed and bill you for the demolition." She thrust a thick packet of papers at me, the HOA bylaws apparently, and turned on her heel. I stood there in shock, watching her march back to a shiny white SUV parked at the edge of my property. I spent the next few hours frantically researching property laws on my phone. The cabin had spotty cell service and no internet. Everything I found confirmed what I already knew. An HOA couldn't force a pre-existing property to join their association. If my property wasn't originally part of their development, they had zero authority over me. The next morning, I drove into town to get better cell service and called a lawyer friend who specialized in real estate. He confirmed my understanding and said this was a classic case of HOA overreach. "They're trying to intimidate you," he explained. "Some HOAs do this. They expand their boundaries on paper and hope no one challenges them. Get your property deed and any historical documentation you have. I'll draft a cease and desist letter." I spent Saturday gathering documentation. Fortunately, my grandfather had been meticulous about keeping records. I had the original deed from 1958, property tax records showing continuous ownership, and even photos of the cabin being built. I also found the survey markers that clearly showed my property boundaries, which were nowhere near the newer development. Sunday morning, right at 9 a.m., a truck pulling a trailer with a small bulldozer rolled up my driveway. Barbara was right behind it in her SUV, along with 2 men in polo shirts who I assumed were other HOA board members. I stepped outside to meet them, documents in hand. "Right on time," I said. "Before you do anything, I have some paperwork you should see." Barbara barely glanced at me. We gave you ample time to comply. The demolition is proceeding as scheduled. Actually, I said louder, I have documentation proving this property has been in my family since 1958 and is not part of your HOA jurisdiction. I also have a cease and desist letter from my attorney. I held up the folder. Would you like to see it, or should I just call the sheriff now to report trespassing and attempted destruction of property? That got their attention. One of the men approached and took the folder, flipping through it with increasing discomfort. I could see Barbara's face turning red. This is all very convenient, she sputtered. Anyone can forge documents. Feel free to verify with the county recorder's office, I replied calmly. In fact, let's call them together. I'm sure they'd be interested to know you're trying to demolish a legally owned property outside your jurisdiction. The bulldozer operator, who had been watching this exchange with growing unease, spoke up. Ma'am, I'm not getting involved in a property dispute. I need proper authorization if there's any question about ownership. Barbara's face was now the color of a tomato. This isn't over, she hissed. That cabin is an eyesore that's affecting our property values. The community won't stand for it. Your community ends half a mile down the road, I pointed out. And I've maintained this property better than most in your development. The other HOA board member, who had been quiet until now, tugged at Barbara's arm. We should go, he murmured. This isn't worth a lawsuit. They retreated, the bulldozer never even unloaded from its trailer. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated Barbara's determination. Over the next week, I received multiple citations for imaginary violations. Improper waste disposal, noise complaints, even accusations that I was running an illegal business from the cabin. Each one I documented and forwarded to my lawyer. Then things escalated. I returned to the cabin after being away for 2 weeks to find someone had spray-painted eyesore across the front door. Security cameras I'd installed after the first confrontation caught Barbara doing it at 11:30 at night, looking over her shoulder the entire time. That was the final straw. I filed for a restraining order and sued both Barbara personally and the HOA for harassment, attempted destruction of property, vandalism, and filing false reports. The evidence was overwhelming. I had everything documented from the initial notice to the spray painting incident. The HOA's lawyer contacted mine within days, desperate to settle. Apparently, this wasn't Barbara's first attempt to expand their territory. She'd been warned before about overstepping boundaries, but the board had looked the other way because she was effective at enforcing rules within their actual jurisdiction. In the end, I received a formal apology from the HOA, compensation for the damage to my cabin, and an agreement that they would never again attempt to claim jurisdiction over my property. Barbara was removed from the board and required to perform community service for the vandalism charge. I used some of the settlement money to improve the cabin, adding solar panels and better insulation. I also built a proper fence along the property line with very clear private property signs. The most satisfying part came 6 months late. When I was enjoying a quiet weekend at the cabin, a young couple walked up my driveway looking confused. We're looking at houses in Pine Valley Estates, the woman explained. The realtor said all these properties are part of the community. I smiled and handed them a copy of the survey map I now kept by the door. Actually, this property isn't part of Pine Valley. I'd be happy to tell you about my experience with their HOA before you make any decisions. They ended up buying a place outside the HOA's boundaries too. Sometimes the best revenge is simply sharing the truth. These days, I spend more time at the cabin than ever. Every time I look at it, I'm reminded not just of my grandfather's legacy, but also of the importance of standing up for what's rightfully yours. No matter how official someone tries to make themselves sound, no one has the right to take what isn't theirs, especially not with a 47-hour notice. The next one is a malicious compliance story. The background here is that during work, I had an accident that damaged my back. Slipped discs that didn't resolve, and subsequent additional damage due to unnatural wear and tear from compensating poor posture and gait. I had a fit note that cleared me for light duties. Now, most of my store team were, and are, these guys are my family even years later, incredibly supportive of my various limitations. Depending on whether I was having a good day or bad, they'd shuffle things around. We did that for everyone. We worked to accommodate whoever needed a helping hand, just to clarify that I wasn't given special treatment. My main difficulty is standing still. Sitting, walking, moving, those are fine. On a good day, I can stand at the self-checkouts for a couple of hours, with some pacing. On a bad day, not at all. Good days, I can work delivery or backstock. Bad days, I did decarding, facing up, putbacks, write-offs, and sitting on tills. However, one colleague was not. She considered it drastically unfair that everyone worked around my damage, so much so that she went above everyone to file a complaint to the store manager that I should be forced to do self-checkouts too. Sunday evening, a charming message was sent to the work WhatsApp group by one of the lower managers stating that, going forward, having pain here so you can't do self-checkouts, having pain there so you can't do delivery, will no longer be accepted. Unless you have a fit note, you can't refuse to do your tasks. I was scheduled to work on the Monday, thankfully a closing shift, so I had a narrow window to work with. Monday 8 a.m., the stars aligned. I was blessed to snag a telephone call back from a GP. If you're in the UK, you'll know how hard it is to talk to a doctor, let alone see one since the plague. It's a nightmare. Anyway, I explained the situation to her, and she was furious. Emailed me an amended fit note to hand into work. That afternoon, I cheerfully went in and handed it to the duty manager for the shift, who read it and then promptly started pissing herself laughing before letting me get started. A 3-month fit note that prohibited me from any lifting, pulling, standing, anything remotely strenuous whatsoever, and stated frequent regular breaks, effectively barring me from all the tasks I did on good days. Apparently that colleague blew a gasket, filed a complaint with the area manager who dismissed it, whereupon she told him she'd go to HR about this, as well as his inaction, and was promptly told that this would constitute harassment and disability discrimination if she insisted. Well, you did want a fit note. The next one is an entitled people story. This story takes place on Åland in southern Finland, and it also features all our favorite Russian dude, Vladimir. Obviously fake name. This story starts with 3 Russian dudes that had booked a 3-day fishing package with 4 nights of accommodation in a luxury beachfront villa and food for all 3 days, basically all-inclusive fishing edition. As you may imagine, this was not a cheap experience. When we discussed the package, the question of alcohol consumption did come up, and I did inform them that a little bit is okay as long as nobody gets drunk to the point of it being a safety concern. It also says in the terms and conditions you have to approve when paying for the reservation. So, they arrive and check in no problems. The fun starts the next day when they show up down at the dock to go out fishing the first day. 2 of the guys come in proper fishing gear with rods and equipment looking ready for a day of pike fishing. But Vladimir seems to have other priorities. He is holding a cooler in one hand and a large bottle of some kind or brown spirits in one hand. When I see this, I remind the group about the alcohol policy, and to this Vladimir laughs, uncorks the bottle and starts chugging. He drinks the whole thing standing right there on the pier in some weird show of dominance, I guess. While this is going on, I just stand there in my boat watching, trying to make sense of what is happening before me. Vladimir Friends doesn't seem too impressed with their friend making a scene the first thing in the morning. After finishing the whole bottle, he looks at me and says, "There, all done." So I'm guessing he thinks he can go on the tour as long as he doesn't drink all that while on the boat. Well, sorry Vladimir, but that's not how this works. You are not going on the boat today. Now, this was not the response Vladimir expected. He started off laughing, thinking it was a funny joke. But when I insisted, and he realized I was not going to let him go on the boat today, he absolutely lost it. He screams and shouts in about equal parts English and what I assume is a long list of Russian profanities. He then says that if I don't let him on the boat, they will all go home and I will have to pay them back for the whole trip. Well, no, Mr. Vladimir, I will not pay you back as clearly stated in the terms and conditions. The free cancellation is only until 7 days before the trips, and it very clearly states that the guide is free to prevent anyone from going on the boat and that we may cancel a tour at any point with no refunds if guests get too drunk. You knew this, we told you, and you did approve the TOC. The accommodation is also 7 days free cancellation, so sure, I am not going to force you to do anything, but you are not getting any money back. He, of course, threatens with the usual. We will hear from his lawyers, and he will call the police or whatever. Who cares anyway? It's not like it's going to work anyway. After a long and heated argument in Russian with his friends, Vladimir storms of, and his 2 friends come back to me and say they still want to go fishing. So of we go without Vladimir. As it turns out, Vladimir and the 2 other guys are childhood friends, and one of them is somehow related to Vladimir, like a cousin or something. And Vladimir is stinking rich. He is apparently a low-ranking government official in Moscow. He owns a yacht and stuff, and he paid for the whole trip for his friends. I do not see Vladimir for the 2 other days either, because apparently the booze is more important than fishing with his friends. The friends were perfectly nice and only had 1 beer each for lunch and dinner when out on the boat. We caught a lot of pikes, so I guess I have taken some ill-earned gains from a corrupt Russian official with a drinking problem. I later heard from a lady that works at the resort I had arranged accommodation for them at that Vladimir had tried to convince the receptionist and even the CEO of the hotel that I'm bad, they needed a refund, and that they should fire me. Only problem is I didn't work for the hotel to start with. They are only a business partner I buy accommodation from occasionally. Still waiting to hear from Vladimir's lawyer 8 years later. The next one is an entitled parent story. Oh my. So much history in my almost 45 years of existence. My 70-year-old father growing up was dirt poor, and he was 1 out of 3 kids. He was apparently the only one who was made to do all the outside chores, including looking after the cattle and other animals, before and after school, the lawn, etc., etc. He was raised to work from the time he woke until he slept basically for everything he's gotten in his life. He's seen how the man was to be treated with respect regardless. My 68-year-old mother growing up didn't have to lift a finger, no cooking, cleaning, etc. Her family was way more wealthy than my father's tenfold. She was also raised that the sun beamed on the man. The world revolves around the man. They met in junior high. Mom was 17 and Dad was 19 when they wed. Mom worked until she adopted my brother, 1978, and myself 2 YRs later. She was a SAHM until 1991, where she worked as a care worker, while Dad worked in the same fashion as when he was growing up, just not farmish life. He maintained everything outside, all the vehicles, etc. Throughout my upbringing, they took frequent loans out from my grandparents, Mom's side, and it became an expectation each time rather than requests, not for necessary things, but wants, like antique vehicles or a pool or to help with vacations. If my grandparents said no, Mom would guilt them with crying, making them feel bad. My brother could do no wrong, even though he treated both of them like crap. He was born with heart issues, so because of that was her reasoning. He could get away with anything. I was raised to be a people pleaser. The sun shined on the man, etc., etc. I was to feel bad for having feelings, let alone emotions. I was always compared to my brother. He could understand most schooling concepts while I had ADHD and struggled throughout school. I was raised to not be trusting in people. My father would rant and rant and rant and curse continuously, and my mother would just listen and put up with it. He is against LGBTQIA+, very outspoken about it in the house. Mom is more closeted about her views, but they're the same. I'm bi and have been an advocate, but never did make the choice to come out. I had begged him throughout the YRS to teach me man things, but he wouldn't. I was a nuisance and not worth the effort. I guess my relationships have always been fact because I have way too much understanding and out up with too fucking much with men and no tolerance for women and their experiences and emotions, but will always try to fix instead of just listening. I've been trying to work on that for years with therapy, but sometimes I fail. Hard. Me? I resented my mother and my father for a lot of things due to the differences of treatment between my brother and I. Still do, even though my brother passed away 2019. My parents never really wanted to spend time with me much, as it was always about my brother. I've had family members tell me in the past, at the time, they never hear about how I'm doing, as it was always about my brother. I had a good relationship with my brother. I didn't have a lot of issues with him. It was my parents who continually allowed that behavior toward them and towards each other. Everything they did, and yet he acted the way he did. Family dynamics are complicated. Anyways, my grandparents, on my mom's side, and I were very close to me. I looked after them in their home until they died. Most of the responsibility was forced on me, though. I could have refused, but I viewed them as more parents to me than my own parents. And my mom used that. It became an expectation that I was the primary caregiver of the both of them. They passed a YR apart from each other. My parents for YRs have took the stance of feeling entitled. I know I'm the failed child, even though now I'm the only child. And now that they are seniors, my mom especially has mentioned several times now about the expectation of me looking after them when they are no longer able to look after themselves. My parents have so much stuff that I beg them to look after all of it now while they can because it wouldn't be fair to leave everything for me to do, especially since my brother isn't there to help, but they refuse. Dad won't sell anything or give me written instructions for after they pass. I can't afford to quit my job or go on a LOA to care for them when they'll need it. They know this because I've told them. They refuse to hear it. Like, sure, if I could, I might. But Jabooz, looking after both of my grandparents was an emotional roller coaster I honestly wasn't prepared for. I'm not sure I can do it again. I live almost 2 HRS away from them as well, so I would have to quit my job. I don't want to do that, FFS. Anyway,